Who do you think you're talking to? Although he's asking who I'm addressing, it seems like Ken, not realizing what position I hold in the company. His angry face glaring at me, Ken's shouting voice was loud enough to echo outside the office. When I reported to President, Mr. Bailey, that I was fired based on Ken's instructions, he looked at me in surprise. I had thought that a dismissal would never happen without going for Mr. Bailey. However, what Mr. Bailey was worried about wasn't me. It was the patent rights I held. What will happen to the patent rights? Disappointed by the words that came out of a worried-looking Mr. Bailey, I let out a heavy sigh. Having been with the company for a long time, I can't stay at a company that sees its employees as nothing more than tools. Starting tomorrow, I'll be joining a rival company, so I guess your business is going down. At my words, Mr. Bailey, looking pale and staring off into the distance, could only respond with a bewildered huh. Past disappointment, I couldn't help but snicker at his reaction. By the time Ken realized what he had done with my departure, it was already too late. Employees are limited and valuable assets, not tools to be used up. A natural consequence awaited the two who failed to understand this. My name is Jack. A fieldwork enthusiast, I've worked as a regular employee, disconnected from promotions even at 49 years old. After graduating from college, I joined a company as a fresh graduate, specializing in creating websites for small and medium businesses and internal systems, and before I knew it, I'd been there for 20 years. Though I've turned down promotions several times, I've managed to lead my subordinates as a project leader in the product development department. When the sales department receives new inquiries or orders, they usually come to me first. After that, our team discusses how to build the system in meetings. Those are my favorite times. Despite being a small company, I take pride in working with teammates who have globally viable ideas. When I received a patent for a program fundamental to our system development, the whole team celebrated. Though the patent rights are in my name as the team leader, I still think of it as everyone's achievement. I plan to continue working together with everyone to become a globally competitive company, but things changed a bit due to an internal personal transfer. A few months after obtaining the patent, Ken, President's son, was suddenly transferred to my product development department. Despite being in his 20s, Ken was inexplicably transferred as a department head. I worried that Ken, with his craftsman-like attitude, might not blend well with the other employees. But my concerns were ignored, and Ken spoke to us with a condescending attitude. I'm going to grow this company. Your regular employees just need to follow my orders. If Ken had achievements or charisma, his arrogant attitude might have been tolerable, but he had none. Without understanding our work, Ken skipped meetings and simply focused on speeding up deliveries for requests we received. There was even a time when Ken unilaterally changed the deadline for a project we were progressing on a comfortable schedule by contacting the client directly. This project doesn't need a month, right? Get it done in 2 weeks. That way, we can take on more orders. It was easy to imagine that having the planned delivery time would inevitably lead to overtime and consecutive days when we couldn't go home properly. Regardless, Ken's tyranny continued, and the motivation of everyone in the department plummeted. I thought that if things continued on this path, turning into a company with harsh working conditions and poor treatment of employees, people would start leaving as if fleeing. So, as a leader, I decided to directly negotiate with Mr. Bailey. Mr. Bailey, about your son. Ken is working hard, right? I plan to have him take over the company, so he needs to start building a solid track record now. I tried to discuss Ken's behavior, but Mr. Bailey wouldn't listen to me and instead made me listen to his boasts about his son. Even when I subtly suggested to Ken that it might be better to change the current situation, he just arrogantly insisted on his position as department head, and it was impossible to have a meaningful conversation. Maybe it's true that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Ultimately, there were no signs of any directives from Mr. Bailey, his father, and Ken's tyrannical behavior only worsened day by day. Ken had been in sales at other companies, but he was still young and barely had any experience as a working adult. Yet, he was suddenly placed in a department head position at his father's company, perhaps feeling like the king of the hill. Every instruction from Ken felt so unreasonable that it seemed impossible to implement. As Ken's behavior became increasingly arrogant day by day, there were more moments when I felt he regarded us almost like slaves. "You all can work here thanks to me. As long as you do what I say, I'll let you stay in this company." Naturally, following Ken's words, a wave of employees began leaving the company. Consequently, my workload increased dramatically, and I found myself staying at the company or nearby hotels more often. Even in such circumstances, Ken's tyranny did not change. On the contrary, he became frustrated with the decreased work efficiency due to fewer hands and blamed us, saying we were incompetent. In an attempt to protect the other employees, I repeatedly voiced my concerns to Ken, but as expected, it led nowhere. "All the work we've done so far had ample leeway. With this ridiculous schedule now, it's unworkable, and we can keep going like this. Why is a regular employee like you giving me, the department head, advice? If I say do it, you as an employee should just do it." I, too, started thinking about leaving the company, just like the other employees, unable to keep up with Ken's actions anymore. Feeling I had reached my limit with Ken's outrageous behavior, I went to Mr. Bailey again to ask him to stop Ken's tyranny. But, just like before, all I got were stories boasting about his son, and it was impossible to have a serious conversation. Feeling a disconnect with his response, I wondered why he was so insistent on having his son Ken do this job. One day, a major complaint came from a longtime client, and we were all busy dealing with it. A sudden system breakdown occurred, and the recovery operation turned out to be an extraordinary situation, not finishing even after a week of all-nighters. Somehow managing to complete the work, I staggered toward the nap room, utterly exhausted. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but the nap room was close to the president's office. At that moment, Mr. Smith, president of the company that caused the system breakdown, had come to our office in person. Listening to the calm conversation between the two, I was shocked to learn an unbelievable truth. Turns out, Mr. Bailey had sent his son to my department to build a track record of working as a boss in a department with someone like me who held a patent. Mr. Bailey had been using us as tools for his son's career advancement. Hearing this, I was devastated to realize that I was nothing more than a tool to the company, and that Mr. Bailey saw me as nothing more. Unable to think about resting, I trudged back to my desk, shoulders slumped and feet heavy. Even in that state, Ken continued to use me like a slave with his usual arrogant attitude. Knowing Mr. Bailey's intentions, I realized there was no need to endure Ken's oppressive behavior anymore. Exhausted, I let all my pent-up frustrations with Ken out in a burst of emotion. "Ken, we've reached our limit. This workload is insane. If you're so insistent, why don't you try doing some of it yourself?" Who do you think you're talking to?" Overtly grumpy, Ken yells at me, glaring at me with an irritated look on his face. Ken's voice was so loud that it leaked out of the office, attracting the attention of all the employees present. Although he's asking who I'm addressing, it seems like Ken is the one who doesn't understand what kind of presence I am and how much I've contributed to the company. Disgusted with Ken's attitude, I looked down and sighed softly. Then, Ken, looking at my face, let out a big sigh. "Fine. We don't need an employee like you in this company. Useless old man like you should just leave." Although it was a sudden notice of dismissal from Ken, in a way, it was the reaction I had anticipated. It wasn't about whether I was needed by the company, but whether I would stay. I never thought I'd be told to leave by Ken, though I had been considering quitting. "So, I'm fired, and it's an order from the department head, right? Are you really okay with me leaving this company?" Ken, not understanding the significance of my words, waved me off with a smug look. Of course, who do you think you are? We have plenty of regular employees. One less won't make a difference. Understood. After bowing deeply to Ken, I headed straight to the president's office. Barging into Mr. Bailey's office, he looked at me with wide eyes, clearly surprised. Then, I told Mr. Bailey everything about Ken's oppressive behavior and everything that had happened so far. I thought he finally listened to me, but his response was unexpected. So it is, but you are here, right? Ken is only 27. It must be just youthful actions. You've been with the company for quite some time. So as a senior, please guide him. Mr. Bailey, either not understanding my point or deliberately ignoring it, said something completely off base. At this moment, I fully realized that Ken was president's son and sighed deeply. I've been directly told by Ken that I'm fired, so I'll be resigning voluntarily. Please handle the paperwork and my severance pay. Is that so? If Ken said that, then it can't be helped. By the way, what about the patent rights you hold? It seemed Mr. Bailey, as the company president, had no particular feelings about me leaving the company. Instead, what he was really concerned about wasn't me, but the patent rights I held. What will happen to the patent rights? Disappointed by the words that came out of a worried-looking Mr. Bailey, I let out a heavy sigh. I couldn't stand working at a company that only saw its employees as tools any longer. Since I'm apparently not needed here, I'll be joining a rival company starting tomorrow. I guess your company is in trouble now. Mr. Bailey finally seemed to understand my words and turned pale, trembling as he realized the gravity of the situation. What? Wait a minute, what are you saying? The revenue from the patent I hold accounts for over 60% of the company's profits. Neither Mr. Bailey nor Ken seemed to understand that. And it was Mr. Bailey himself who had left the handling of the patent entirely up to me from the beginning, not knowing what to do with it. I was frustrated that there were no rewards from the company for this, so I registered the patent under my own name. Of course, without me, the company would no longer have the right to claim that patent. I interrupted him just as he was about to say something. Then, I thank you for everything up to now. Then I quickly left the president's office. I could hear Mr. Bailey saying something behind me, but as I was leaving the company, it no longer mattered to me. Previously, I had vented to a friend about my dissatisfaction with Ken's strange behavior over drinks. My friend, Troy, and I have been drinking buddies for ages, getting together almost every month. Though I couldn't share confidential details, Troy is a close friend I can talk about anything. Troy understood that something was wrong with my workplace. That's totally illegal and a terrible company. Jack, don't push yourself too hard, he said during one of our drinking sessions, which ended up being more of a vent than a consultation. Then, suddenly being serious, Troy made a proposal. Hey, if you're okay with it, why don't you come work at my company? Troy's company is a rival to mine. We've competed in bids for big projects several times. Though we're rivals, the employees at the ground level get along fairly well. It's only the upper management that treats each other like archenemies. I was honestly happy about Troy's offer. Just knowing there was a company that needed someone like me was comforting. At this time, I was still not thinking about leaving the company I had been with for so long. Of course, Troy knew about the patent I held. He once mentioned that his company had considered headhunting me. He didn't push it then, letting the conversation fade. But now, Troy had promoted to the position of HR director at the rival company. Recently, the executives at the rival company, hearing about the declining performance of Mr. Bailey's company, urged Troy to recruit me again. They seemed interested in bringing me, with my experience and achievements, and my patent into their company. According to Troy, if I joined his company, they were willing to offer double my current salary. It was an attractive offer, but since it was discussed over drinks, I only half believed it at the time. A month after this job offer, Troy called me for a serious talk. About our last conversation, the executives also find your skills and patent attractive. If you're willing, would you seriously consider it? Such an opportunity with great benefits might never come again. Still, leaving my current company felt like betraying my colleagues with whom I had worked so closely. I had been pondering over Troy's offer for several days when Ken told me I was fired. On my way to the president's office to discuss my resignation, I immediately called Troy. It turned out I could start the new job as early as the next day. Seeing Mr. Bailey's pale face, I felt slightly guilty, but in the end, if they cared more about the patent than my presence, it was their own doing. After gathering my belongings, I decided to leave for the day. As I passed through the hallway, I coincidentally ran to Ken, who seemed pleased with himself for having driven me out, smirking as he looked at me. Maybe he felt satisfied since the only person who ever talked back to him was leaving. Disgusted with Ken, I didn't bother to respond. With everything that had happened, I had no regrets left and went straight home after thanking my colleagues. On my way back, I ignored several calls from Mr. Bailey. His voicemails contained apologies, but for me, it was already a closed chapter, and I didn't return the calls. About a month after I started working at the rival company, Mr. Bailey called me again. "Jack, won't you reconsider? Without you, Ken can't make any significant achievements." Hearing his words, treating me not just as an ordinary employee but as a tool for his son, left me speechless in disbelief. There were offers of better conditions for returning, but they paled in comparison to what I was receiving at my new job. "I'll consider returning on one condition. If Ken resigns from the company, I'll think about it." Furious at my response, Mr. Bailey quickly changed his tone, shouting over the phone, "Who do you think you are? You're mocking me. I can't let my son resign." As expected, Mr. Bailey's company's profits plummeted without my patent. There were issues like unpaid salaries, and the company struggled to survive. A week after Mr. Bailey's call, surprisingly, Ken reached out to me. "Why is the company falling apart just because you're gone?" Ken's voice sounded desperate, yet he still spoke condescendingly. "That's why I asked you if it was really okay for me to leave. I didn't know about the patent you held. It can't be helped. My father never told me about it. Why didn't you say that?" Even if I had told Ken about the patent, his reaction probably wouldn't have been any different. I told him that his own tyrannical behavior was why I left the company. Ken hesitated and then fell silent. That is, he started to say something, but then the call ended abruptly without another word. Working stress-free at the new company was gratifying, but one thing still concerned me. That is my former subordinates. My subordinates, who do their jobs well despite my complaints, are invaluable to me. It is also thanks to them that I was able to obtain a patent. I wanted to help them and asked Troy if he could take care of my former team members. To my surprise, Troy had already planned to hire them. Even more, he planned to acquire the entire company. The scale was larger than I expected, but it turned out there were ongoing discussions about merging the two rival companies. My moving to this company had accelerated those plans. At the signing ceremony for the merger, Mr. Bailey looked displeased but seemed somewhat grateful for avoiding bankruptcy. Days later, during a major staff realignment, I reunited with my former subordinates. Unexpectedly, Ken was also transferred under me. When we met again, he was no longer arrogant but timid and reserved. Curious, I invited him to the break room for a chat. He shared how his past actions had become a burden, and he had kept his distance from other employees. In his previous job in sales, he struggled without much success and was almost sidelined. It was then that Mr. Bailey invited him to join his company. Ken, who had previously been sidelined in his sales job, must have felt lonely and fearful after suddenly being made a department head. He thought adopting a superior and arrogant attitude was the way to prevent being disrespected by others. Initially, Ken even refused the offer of the department head position. However, Mr. Bailey, not listening to him, simply told him to just do it, leaving Ken anxious and confused about what to do daily. In the end, Ken too was a victim of Mr. Bailey's habit of neglecting responsibilities. Now free from those constraints, Ken told me he felt as if he had been reborn. Mr. Bailey, who had treated both me and Ken as mere tools, was deemed incompetent by the executives and is now being used as a low-level employee. Unlike Mr. Bailey, Ken, surprisingly observant and helpful, diligently accomplishes detailed tasks as my subordinate. Everyone was initially a bit confused by the sudden change in Ken's attitude. After a few days, when it became clear that Ken had genuinely changed, he naturally became part of our team. I am now leading a new project team at my new company. Unlike before, the company recognizes and appreciates the work I do, which has positively impacted not only my motivation but also that of my colleagues. 3 years after changing jobs, having successfully developed new technology, I started an internal venture with my team, including Ken. We secured new patents, allowing us to grow not only as a company but also together as a team. Work is busy and challenging, but the sense of achievement and fulfillment makes every day enjoyable.